My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is the moment my brother stood in the middle of our family reunion, jabbed his finger toward me, and told 40 relatives that I was a liar. She's lying. She was just a desk clerk. That's what Marcus shouted. Marcus, my older brother, the one who'd spent his whole life needing to be the loudest person in any room I was standing in. Behind him, chairs scraped against the grass as people turned to look at me. Someone laughed, low and uncertain, the kind of laugh that's really just relief that they're not the one being humiliated. I remember the paper plate in my hand, the potato salad going warm in the July heat, my aunt's wind chimes clinking somewhere behind the house like nothing in the world had just cracked open. I set the plate down on the picnic table, and I didn't say a word. I just started walking toward my car. Behind me I heard the clapping start, not loud, not everyone, but enough. Enough that I felt it land somewhere under my ribs. My cousin Denise, the one person in that family who'd never once made me explain myself, she didn't clap. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching Marcus like she was trying to memorize his face for later. I kept walking. Gravel under my boots, the kind of quiet ringing in my ears that happens right after something loud. I got about 10 feet from my car door when I heard it. A sound I would know anywhere, a sound that had once meant get to cover, a sound that now, in the middle of a residential street in Ohio, meant something had gone very wrong or very right, and I wasn't sure yet which. Engines. Not one. A line of them, black and heavy, turning off the main road and rolling slow down our street like the street itself had been rearranged to make room. My uncle's radio, playing oldies from a cooler by the fence, kept spinning out Sam Cooke like nothing was happening. But everything was happening. Doors were already opening before the vehicles had fully stopped, and men and women in dark suits were moving with that particular economy of motion you only see in people trained to waste nothing, not a step, not a word, not a second. And they weren't looking at the house. They weren't looking at Marcus, red-faced and triumphant by the picnic table. They were looking at me. To understand how it came to this, how a man in an earpiece could jog across my aunt's front lawn and say my name like it was a password, you have to go back. You have to go back to 2 kids in the same house, growing up under 2 very different suns. I was the quiet one. That's the word people always reached for, quiet, like it was a diagnosis instead of a description. Marcus was the one who filled rooms. He was 2 years older, louder in every sense, and from as far back as I can remember, he was the son my father pointed to when other men asked how his kids were doing. My father, a good man, in his way, but a man who measured worth the way some men measure lumber, by length and visibility, he kept a shelf in the hallway for Marcus's trophies. Little League, then football, then a business degree he finished in 5 years instead of 4 but finished loud, with a graduation party that shut down half our cul-de-sac. There was no shelf for me. There wasn't room, I used to think, because I never gave him anything shelf-shaped. What I gave him instead was silence, and a series of phone numbers that changed every few months, and postcards from places he couldn't find on a map without squinting. I enlisted at 19, the week after a fight with my father that I still won't repeat in full, and from that day forward, my family's story about me calcified into something small and safe for them to hold. She does something with computers. She's stationed somewhere warm. She'll come home eventually and get a real job. Marcus fed that story every chance he got, not out of cruelty exactly, I want to be fair, but because a smaller version of me made a bigger version of him make more sense. If I was just a desk clerk, then his account manager job at a regional bank was the serious achievement in the family. If I was just quiet, unremarkable, playing at something, then he never had to sit with the question of what it meant that his little sister had chosen a life he was afraid of. The truth, the one I couldn't tell them, sat in a different part of me entirely, a part that didn't come out at Thanksgiving. I spent years in postings I'm still not allowed to name in full, doing work that eventually pulled me sideways out of a standard career track and into something narrower, something that required more vetting than most people go through in a lifetime. By the time I was 31, I had been assigned to a small, specialized detail that exists at the intersection of military service and executive protection, the kind of unit that trains alongside the people who guard the most protected individuals in the country, the kind of unit whose members sometimes get quietly folded into protective details when the math of a mission calls for exactly their skill set. I can't give you the org chart. I can tell you that the people I worked with didn't ask what my family thought of me. They already knew what I was worth, because they'd seen me do the job. Denise knew more than the rest of them, not the classified parts, but the shape of it, that I disappeared for months at a stretch, that I came home changed in ways she never pushed me to explain, that I flinched at fireworks one July and she just quietly moved us both inside without making it a thing. Denise was 2 years younger than me, my late aunt's daughter, raised more like a sister than a cousin because our mothers had been inseparable before cancer took mine when I was 17. She never once asked me to prove anything. She'd hug me at the door before I even said hello, and she was the only person at every reunion who asked what I actually did that week, instead of asking when I was going to settle down. While Marcus built his story about me in front of an audience, Denise built something quieter. She just kept believing me, year after year, without needing evidence. I used to think that was naivety. I understand now it was faith, and faith like that doesn't need a paper trail. But faith isn't always enough to survive a room full of people clapping for your humiliation. There's an internal ledger you keep, when you spend your whole life being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. You don't mean to keep it. It just accrues, every eye roll, every must be nice, playing soldier, every time your father introduced Marcus's promotion at a party before he'd even ask how your last deployment went, assuming he asked at all. Mine had a lot of entries by the time I was 33. The line went red the day I got back from an assignment I still can't fully discuss, an assignment that ended with a commendation I was told, very politely, that I couldn't display or discuss with civilians, not even family, not for years. I remember standing in my apartment holding that letter, and thinking about my father's hallway shelf, and laughing in a way that had nothing funny in it. I didn't set out to build a case. That's not how people like me think. Cases are for people who need a jury. What I built, without quite meaning to at first, was a body of evidence about my own life that I simply stopped hiding. My commanding officer, a woman named Colonel Reyes, my direct supervisor for 3 years, sharp-eyed and famously stingy with praise, had, months earlier, quietly told me that a piece of my clearance was about to lift, that certain details of my last 2 assignments would soon be declassified enough for me to speak about them in general terms, and that I should expect, at some point, official acknowledgement tied to a high-visibility protective assignment I'd rotated onto the year before. I filed that information away the way you file away a spare key. Not urgent. Just there, waiting for the day the lock changed. The reunion invitation came the way it always did, a group text from my aunt with a smiling emoji and a potluck sign-up sheet. I almost didn't go. I'd gone gray around the edges of that family, tired of translating myself into terms Marcus found acceptable. But Denise called me the night before, said she missed me, said she'd save me a seat away from the noise. So I went, and I brought a fruit salad, and I said almost nothing for 2 hours, which was apparently enough silence for Marcus to fill with his own version of me, the desk clerk, the pretend soldier, the sister who disappeared for months and came back with stories nobody could check. I didn't argue with him. That was the strategy, if you could call something so instinctive a strategy. I had learned, a long time ago, that explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who you are is like arguing with weather. You don't win. You just get wet. So when he said what he said, in front of 40 people holding paper plates, I did the only thing that had ever actually worked in my life when someone tried to make me smaller than I was. I walked away and let the truth catch up on its own schedule. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the protective detail I'd rotated onto 8 months earlier wasn't finished with me yet. There had been a scheduling shift 2 days before the reunion, a change in a travel route that put a certain motorcade through our home state for an unrelated regional event, and a piece of coordination on my end that I'd handled from my phone that very morning, sitting at my aunt's kitchen table, while everyone around me assumed I was just checking email. I'd told exactly one person where I'd be that weekend, because protocol required a local point of contact for the 2 hours I'd be off-grid and unreachable by normal channels. That person was my team lead. Nobody else. Not my father, not Marcus, not even Denise. I never imagined the two would collide on a residential street lined with plastic lawn chairs and a cooler of warm soda. But they did. That's the thing about the truth, it doesn't check your calendar before it shows up. The lead agent, a tall man named Agent Cole, calm-voiced, unreadable behind aviators, was already moving before the second vehicle in the line had fully stopped. He crossed the lawn with the kind of purposeful stride that makes everyone else's conversation die mid-sentence, and he said my name, my actual full name, the one my family used only when I was in trouble as a kid. "Ma'am, we need you for a moment," he said, and something about ma'am landing on me, in front of my father's disappointed hallway shelf of a family, nearly broke something loose in my chest that I'd been holding steady for 15 years. I turned around. The entire reunion had gone silent in that specific way crowds go silent, not polite, just stunned, the sound of 40 people simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they understood. My father's paper cup had stopped halfway to his mouth. My aunt had her hand pressed flat against her collarbone. And Marcus, who 30 seconds earlier had been basking in applause for tearing me down, Marcus stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, looking at the black vehicles idling on our street like he was trying to find a door out of the moment he was standing in. Agent Cole didn't explain himself to the crowd, because that isn't how these things work. He wasn't there to give my family closure, he was there to do a job, and the job happened to intersect, by pure and merciless coincidence, with the worst thing my brother had ever said to me in public. But he did turn, briefly, toward the stunned semicircle of relatives, and he said one sentence that did more work than any speech I could have written for myself. "We appreciate the department clearing the route, she's part of the advanced security coordination for this stop." Advanced security coordination. For words that reorganized 15 years of family mythology in the space of a single breath. I want to be honest about that moment, because I think people expect the vindication to feel like triumph, like some kind of movie score swelling behind you. It didn't feel like that. It felt like standing very still while a structure you'd built your whole identity around, the idea that you had to earn your place, that you had to prove and prove and prove, quietly, finally, stopped being necessary. I looked at my brother, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel the old ache to make him understand. I just felt tired, and a little bit free. Denise reached me before anyone else did, pushing past aunts and uncles who'd suddenly rediscovered their manners, grabbing my arm like she needed to confirm I was real. "You never said," she whispered, and I told her the truth, that I couldn't, that most of it I still can't, that this was never about hiding it from her, it was about a job that required silence even from the people who deserved better. She nodded like that made perfect sense, because for Denise, it always would. My father found his voice about 4 minutes later, after Agent Cole had stepped a respectful distance away to speak into his radio, after the street had gone from chaos back to something like order. He walked over slowly, the way older men walk when their certainty has taken a hit they don't know how to name yet. "You could have told us," he said, and I looked at him, at the man who built a shelf for one child and a silence for the other, and I said the only thing that felt true. "I did tell you." Nobody wanted to believe the quiet version. He didn't have an answer for that. For once, in my whole life, neither did the room. The months after the reunion did something strange to my family, something I hadn't fully planned for and didn't particularly enjoy watching, though I won't pretend there wasn't a small, sharp satisfaction folded in there somewhere. Word travels fast in families, even the parts you never confirmed and never will. My aunt told my uncle, who told a neighbor, who apparently told half of the extended family group chat, and within a season I'd gone from the desk clerk to some half-mythic figure nobody quite understood but everyone suddenly wanted photographed with at Christmas. I found that almost sadder than the years of dismissal. It wasn't that they'd finally seen me. It was that a line of black cars had seen me first, and made it impossible for them not to. Colonel Reyes called me not long after, once the relevant pieces of my file had cleared for limited disclosure, and told me, in her clipped, unsentimental way, that there would be a small ceremony the following spring, a formal commendation tied to 2 years of protective and advisory work I still can't detail beyond that sentence. She asked if I wanted family there. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to picture my father's hallway shelf, and I told her just one guest. Denise flew out for it in her one good blazer, cried through the entire 15-minute ceremony, and told everyone back home about it in more detail than I was technically allowed to have shared with her, which I let slide, because some rules are worth softening for the one person who never needed proof. Marcus texted me 3 weeks after the reunion. I still have it saved, not out of spite, just as a kind of marker. Hey. Didn't know all that. Proud of you, I guess. I read it twice, standing in the kitchen of the apartment I'd finally settled into near base, and I felt the old ledger open one more time, out of habit, ready to log the entry. Then I closed it. I didn't write back anything sharp. I didn't write back anything warm either. I just sent, appreciate it, and went back to making dinner, because I realized somewhere in that silence that I no longer needed his accounting of me to know my own worth. I'd carried the real ledger the whole time, and it had never once needed his signature. These days, when people ask me what I do, I tell them the truth in the shape I'm allowed to give it, that I served, that I still do work I can't fully discuss, that I once had a very long, very public moment when a presidential motorcade turned onto a quiet street and proved something I'd stopped trying to prove to anyone. I don't lead with it. I don't need to anymore. If there's one thing I'd want you to carry out of this story, it's that the people who love you loud aren't always the ones who see you clearly. Sometimes it's the quiet cousin standing with her arms crossed, the one who never needed the motorcade to believe you. Thanks for sitting with my story. If it landed somewhere in you, drop a comment and tell me who your Denise is, and I'll see you in the next one.